Guys, good to see you all. Let's just go around the horn because, Hogan, I want to get into some specifics with you about the night. I know you were there. You're working with Speaker Johnson. But just give me your initial thoughts, what you thought of the speech. Hogan, I'll start with you.
Structurally, I really liked it because what Donald Trump did was he started off with the accomplishments. And what's fascinating was in 4 weeks, he was able to rattle off more accomplishments that improved the lives of Americans than Joe Biden could after 4 years. So that was very intriguing to me. In addition, he used the crowd and his guests to incredible effect with someone who had suffered brain injury because a man had played women's sports, with a kid who was diagnosed with terminal cancer 5 years. He's still fighting that battle. Girls who had been mistreated by AI, making them appear in all types of ridiculously lewd scenes online. In addition, the capture and bringing back of the person, the mastermind behind the terrorist action at Abbey Gate that killed 13 of our service members. Incredible move on his part. And then ending the speech with the lofty goals of what we're going to try to achieve with the America First agenda and ushering back in a renaissance of the American dream. Those things were all fascinating. I know we're going to get to the Democrats because I can't wait to get on that. But I think overall the speech was really good. And really spoke to, it wasn't a speech for the mainstream media. It was a speech for the people, and it delivered.
Yeah, and the Insta polls show it. We'll talk about that. Plus, I do want to get into the props, the people, because I think that was you're absolutely right. You're so brilliant. Dillian, when you guys were covering at the Daily Caller, what were the big takeaways and themes that you guys pushed out?
Well, the first thing was that it really flew by, in my opinion. Trump tends to give long speeches. We've talked about how long this one was, and it was very lengthy. But when I looked down at my own clock last night after watching it, I didn't even realize how much time had gone by. I thought it really flowed well, and it kind of didn't feel like it was a 2-hour speech, even though it was getting to that level of length. So that was the one thing I noticed. Then the other, Hogan just talked about the guests that were there, and I don't want to get too much into the Democrat reaction because that's coming later, but Trump's use of the people there to highlight their stories, to make these heartfelt moments come to life in the room, and then juxtapose that with the Democrats' reactions to it, and in some case lack of reaction, I think was a really smart strategic move to kind of highlight what they're doing and what they're reacting to.
Caroline, to Dylan's point, I didn't realize it was a 2-hour speech until I looked. There was nothing that was like the slow part. Like, in a movie, sometimes it drags. I felt like I was captivated the whole time. And I was trying to stay in touch with the chat on the line, and people would sometimes say, "Are you still there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm captivated by the speech." What was it that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, it kept a ton of momentum the whole way through. It was in his signature style, which was this combination of some prompter, but also riffing. And the riffing that he did do was extremely comedic. And I'll say what I think this speech had was something for everyone. It had the comedic value because obviously there was plenty of humor packed into that, unless, of course, you're the stodgy Democrats that just want to frown at everything. And it was also extremely emotional. And, Hogan mentioned all those powerful testimonies. And the thing about the testimonies, it's that it was wonderful to highlight these individuals as examples of this administration's accomplishments so far or the detriments of the last administration. But, the mainstream media and Democrats try so hard to dehumanize Trump, to make him seem like this unempathetic, tyrant that's unfeeling. But I noticed through many of those stories, you could tell he feels like this is personal. He said something to the effect of, "We will always remember our beautiful Laken Riley." He said something about Corey Comparator. He's never going to forget that guy. And the fact that he was able to not only say them by name, but you could tell like there's something very personal to him about their tragedies and why they were allowed to happen under Democratic rule. Biden was at best disconnected from the public. These were pretend empaths, and that's what the Democrats are time and time again. Is they don't actually care about women's rights or women's success in America because those females in pink on the other side of the aisle voted against the bill that would protect women's sports. Laken Riley, that was an intentional policy choice that the Biden administration allowed to happen by opening the floodgates and allowing illegal alien criminals in. So it's like the juxtaposition between what we thought was the blue party of empathy and compassion is actually the complete opposite. And Trump, I think, emerged as not only the guy who can boast about a lot of policy accomplishments, but as the one who truly cares.
Hogan, before we keep going, I knew that you worked with Speaker Johnson and that you were there last night, and I couldn't help the second that I saw Al Green get up and Speaker Johnson get him booted out. I was like, okay, I got it. I said on Twitter, Speaker Johnson just did like what the kids call a boss move, because he was ready for it. And so just bring us inside for a second. There's no, I mean, Johnson was on his game last night, and he was like, you know, it's like a dad yelling at a kid. You do it one more time and you're in your room. And last night Johnson executed. He was like, all right. And I watched the side, the sergeant at arms, I don't know if they call them officers or official, kind of goes down the Democratic side, and he was standing there waiting. And it was almost like, all right, Congressman Green, you go further, we're sending you your room. And sure enough, Johnson was like, boom, you're out.
Right.
How was that? Like, what did you guys do to plan and war game that out?
Well, look, first of all, he was a parent, but more like a Republican parent, because he says, do it one more time, and then we're getting you out. And then he got you out. There were no timeout. No, we're gonna put you in timeout for 15 minutes. We're gonna wait. We're not gonna. He was ready for that. Look, I think the rumors and the speculation and the plans were kind of permeating throughout the House yesterday, with Democrats saying, here's what we're going to do. We've got all these big plans to get out there and disrupt the speech. And I think the speaker understood the gravity of the moment. I think he understood that Donald Trump had the mic and the American people were listening. It was his first time back to Congress since the previous term, and they wanted to hear it. And he wasn't going to let something derail that. And if you notice,
but Hogan, like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like Johnson was ready. Like,
I know he was.
And to interrupt the president, right, is takes a lot. Like, you don't know, does Donald Trump like that? Does he not like that? Is it the right time? And Johnson was pitch perfect. Did you guys rehearse any of that?
I don't want to get too far deep into the weeds or behind the curtain on what happened on our side. I will say, though, you know, you don't do much in this building without the blessing of the president. You know what I mean? And knowing the disruption was coming, you got to be prepared to make a move. And Speaker Johnson,
war gamed it, right? I mean, it's not. I don't think it's a secret.
Oh yeah, you don't just these things rarely happen where, you know, you just spur of the moment. I mean, we knew something was coming, and I think Johnson was ready for it. He took the appropriate action. Now I think there's even a move to censure him, the Congressman Al Green, and I think that's coming too.
Well, I mean, look, I'm sorry. I felt like the thing that was interesting to me, Dylan, right, is that he gets up there and afterwards we find out that he was yelling about, you don't have a mandate to cut Medicare. And I'm like, Medicaid. And I was like, wait a second. He didn't cut Medicaid. There is no cuts to Medicaid. Right. So you guys look like a bunch of bozos because you actually are protesting something that's not even happening. And I felt like this was like unbelievably foolish. Did you guys, I have not checked the Daily Caller. How did you guys handle the outburst? Because Politico, God bless him, wrote that he was ejected from the thing as if like somehow he was the victim.
Well, we like to write what actually happens, so we wrote that he was interrupting the speech and screaming like a maniac, and then got kicked out, which is pretty appropriate, I think.
Which is what happened.
Which is exactly what happened, and I think the whole episode was really emblematic of the state of the Democratic Party at the moment. There's a lot of pundits that would tell you it's easier to be an opposition party than it is to be governing and actually have to get stuff done. But Democrats are really putting that theory to the test. They don't have a unified message. I mean, the fact he was shouting about Medicare and Medicaid and cutting that when the Republicans have said repeatedly that's not what they're going to do, and I think we all know it would be politically harmful to do, and they're not going to. The fact that that seems to be the message that they're grasping for is really telling that they don't have much else. And, you know, we saw that leadership reportedly was telling people not to protest, to not make fools of themselves, to not make a scene, and yet a bunch of their members were unable to do that and went out and just went rogue and had to, you know, try to hog the cameras for themselves. And I think it really shows that there's this disconnect within their party right now. They don't know how to handle Trump and how to oppose him in a way that's effective right now, and they're really just grasping for whatever they can.
Can I say
Caroline, you go ahead, Hogan.
Just real quick. Sorry, Caroline, I don't want to jump on you here. But if Democrats want to make the face of their resistance a 77-year-old congressman with a cane, literally personifying the meme of an old man shouting at clouds,
it's much younger than their last face. For the record.
It had the element of, get off my lawn, Mr. Trump.
I know. Just be my guest. It was clear in the room too. After they started physically removing the man, Congressman Green, no Democrats really protested that either. They didn't hoot and holler. It was just kind of like, all right, you know. I mean, they were so deadpan the entire time, which I know we're going to get to. But, even they were like, all right, just let him go.
Caroline, 8 years ago, whatever it was, Joe Wilson stood up and yelled, "You lie" to Barack Obama. And the world went nuts. I mean, it was, he has to apologize. The morning shows led with it. No coverage that I can see in the left-wing legacy media this morning about the spectacle of the Democrats last night.
No, they are refusing to acknowledge just how disruptive and petulant this behavior was. Very unbecoming of sitting members of the legislature, lack total decorum. And, to both your points, if they wanted to prove that they are now the party of stodgy scolds where old man yells at cloud is like the vignette of choice and they're going to have bingo placards, well, they sealed it. They sealed the brand. Like, that's done. And it was really silly, shenanigans the whole way through. And what I will say when it comes to the Medicaid thing, I think this is part of the, Elon Musk becoming the boogeyman of this administration so far, which I think has been politically advantageous to Trump in many ways because he's taken a lot of arrows for Trump, even though he's literally not in the government technically, at least in the formal cabinet way. So, Elon Musk, he's an accounting guy, and he has said, I don't know how much Doge can do if we don't look at entitlements. Is that the same as saying we're going to abolish or make significant cuts to these programs? No. But
Right.
they're definitely using that as ammunition because Elon Musk, he recognizes that our fiscal house is in bad shape, and he's proposed ways to help that. And I'm sure Democrats just were ready to pounce, and they're applying that to Trump, who never ran on that.
Dylan, I mean, I think that overall, like Al Green aside, their response last night, Hogan alluded to this. When a kid with cancer, when we're sitting there applauding, his fight against cancer and how we need to address childhood cancer or whatever, and the Democrats sit down, can't clap. When we hear the story of Corey Comparatore getting killed, when we hear the story about a young woman getting a traumatic brain injury because a man hit her in the head, and on and on and on. All of these, a young man getting his acceptance into West Point right there, something that we should all embrace. That wasn't a Trump thing. That wasn't a Republican thing. It wasn't a conservative thing. Those are all American things. And I was embarrassed for the Democratic Party last night because they couldn't stand and just say, okay, we don't like Trump. I get it. But we can love America and we can love the challenges and the feats and the accomplishments of these individuals. And it was, to me, a huge contrast that our country faces right now. This was sort of like reminiscent of the election. There are a lot of people who said, I was never Trump, but I came over because the Democratic Party has lost their way so much. And last night, to me, was the visualization, the manifestation of that, where these guys couldn't even stand for a kid with cancer.
Yeah, usually after a side loses an election, it causes some level of reflection, maybe some change, some thought of how do we shift things and go a different direction and try to win people back. And it doesn't seem to be happening at all so far. They seem to be locked in this partisan brain mentality where, anything Trump says is wrong. We can't applaud any of it. We can't go along with any of it. But if they would just enter this with, a human brain and just think about it as regular people and try to act normal, you could say, okay, well, we're not going to applaud for the policies we don't agree with or the jabs he might take at us, but we can applaud for the things that everybody agrees with, for the kid with cancer getting honored, for the renaming of things after victims of illegal migrant crime. We can applaud for these things that everybody should agree with. And the fact that they can't even bring themselves to do that shows that I don't think they've really grappled with the fact that they did lose to Donald Trump, that he did win the popular vote, and that they did suffer this massive defeat, and that they are going to have to change, and they can't just keep going business as usual. But right now it seems that's what they're doing, and they keep picking fights on stupid issues like the women and women's sports and protecting women's sports from biological men. That's an 80-20 issue.
Yeah.
80% of the country, but more than that, probably agrees with it, and yet they're taking the strong minority position, and it's just politically stupid, and they don't seem to be waking up to that reality yet.
Yeah. The CBS poll afterwards said that 76% of people who watched it approved of the speech. And this goes right along with that's almost 80%, 80-20. They're still in that 20%, which is just so dumb, as you point out, politically for them. And I remember in the first administration, Sean, as most times he gave a speech at the well in the House of Representatives, he got 80% approval of those who watched it. the people who just saw the news coverage gave him like 30% approval, which shows the sieve of bias that they try to make you view his comments through. But I got to tell you, I was absolutely furious. I was disgusted by those Democrats who wouldn't stand up. And Sean, you're right. This isn't a Republican thing. These are American stories, heartwarming, heartfelt stories of real people facing real challenges that have overcome them. You can't stand up for a woman who suffered brain damage because of a sporting event. You had a man participate with it. No, of course not, because then that would be a tacit acknowledgement that men shouldn't play women's sports. But I mean, the cancer kid, that come on. Getting an honorary Secret Service detail recognition, things like that are just so sweet. And the young man who's now going to the military academy. I mean, how do you not stand up and cheer for that? It was a really bad look for them. The paddles were stupid. But again, when you don't win presidential elections, we know you don't really have a North Star. You don't have a compass because you don't have someone leading the party, and you flounder for a little bit. But these folks have chosen not just to flounder, but to double down in support of, advocating for fraud, waste, and abuse in the government. I mean, Republicans have been so smart so far. Democrats are on the wrong side of the plastic versus paper straw debate. They're taking all of the wrong positions.
Caroline, I think, to Hogan's point, you guys, I know you're part of the Independent Women's Forum. And last night was a big win. Riley Gaines is sitting there, the volleyball player. Like, he really exposed the divisions, and he campaigned on this issue, how this woke mentality, this lowest common denominator policy of figuring out what the least of us needs and then making everyone else abide by. This was a big night for women last night, I think, to call out. You had these women, you noted this, Caroline, they're wearing pink to support women, and yet they, the day before, had just voted to keep men in women's sports.
It's so rich. It really is. And that, to Hogan's point, is an 80-20 issue. We know that gender ideology was toxic to voters at the ballot box, and the Democrats are still digging in their heels and claiming to be the party of women. Nobody's buying it anymore. And Peyton McNabb, Trump gave a really great background as to what happened to her when she was literally pummeled in the head by a male opponent on the other team. But she's still suffering mental and physical injuries to this day. She was taken out of the arena permanently. I mean, like, talk about disenfranchisement. And again, the Democrats, what they showed yesterday was petty tribalism. Because in my opinion, they don't view us as a nation. They feel no kinship toward their fellow American or citizens. They will put foreigners and a fringe minority, men who think they're women, above the vast majority of American people every single time. And they desperately need a reset, but I don't know if that's coming anytime soon. We saw how they cheered for the Ukraine aid, and that was it. And and
they still sat, by the way. They still sat. They were sitting on their hands and wearing gold, yellow and blue.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.